And insurance. Now, if you have things purchased on contract, you're going to be required to have insurance because the lender is going to require you to insure the equipment and the property that you have borrowed money to obtain. If you own it yourself outright and you have yourself a $20,000 mower, that same old mower, and you own it outright, you don't need to insure it. It's not required. But if something happens to it, if it gets stolen or if one of your operators rams it into a tree and you end up with a giant bit of damage to that thing, or it disappears, you're hung out to dry. You pay the price of fixing it or replacing it. So insurance is simply paying somebody else some money to bet that you're going to have a disaster along the way. You're gambling on a failure when you buy insurance, but you can't hardly live without it. And particularly liability insurance. Now this is where the potential if somebody gets injured on your property because of whatever reason. And the more public the property, the more liability risk you have. You don't have very much liability risk out here in an onion field. There's not going to be a whole lot of people out there a whole lot of the time. But you have a huge liability risk on a baseball field, a football field, a golf course, a school grounds. So in the turf side of this, you can have huge liability. And so you need to have liability insurance to protect yourself from somebody getting tripping over a sprinkler head and breaking their ankle playing a football game. That's the kind of things you dread in our business. But that's one of the huge liability issues that we deal with. Another thing is flooding. Say you have a main line blow in the middle of the night and you end up flooding out a neighborhood or somebody's basement. There's one in residential irrigation. I owned a company for 10 years. I only flooded one basement in 10 years. I carried $1 million liability claim on my insurance waiver just because of the fact that somebody might walk along someday when we're in construction and step in a ditch and break their leg or do something crazy like that. And boy, I tell you what, you got to be ready for something like that. You can have an open trench that somebody falls into and you can have yourself a really big liability lawsuit on your hands. Or even this, one of your employees driving one of your vehicles going to pick up parts at the store and gets in a wreck. Well, I want to tell you, they're going to sue that kid, they're going to sue you, they're going to sue the car manufacturer and everybody else they can think of to find a way to make a buck in some cases. And so you've got to have that liability insurance to give yourself an umbrella of protection over some of these zany lawsuits that are coming out. I mean, there's people that make a living out of taking dives in front of cars. And you got to be prepared because you might end up being the victim of one of those people. And also your workforce, if they get injured, they should be covered, and you're paying for the insurance, workman's compensation in this state. That's one of the requirements that as an employer must provide, and the state guarantees coverage to all workers within the state, and it's a requirement of you as an employee to pay for workman's compensation insurance. Question, Mike?
I just wanted, do you have to give a certain guarantee, like if you put a law system in to where you'd only be liable for so long? Like say if you had it in there for 6 months and then it blew the main line and flooded the basement, would you be liable?
Probably if it was that short-lived when the damage occurred. If it were due to faulty workmanship, if they could prove that you were the one that caused that to happen, then you are probably going to be responsible for the repair. That would be the case. And the longevity, you can't say of 6 months or a year. Lord only knows what a judge would rule or a court would rule to decide. If you
flooded that basement?
Yeah, when we flooded that basement, it happened overnight, the first night that we turned the system on, and we paid the pauper, yeah. But you know, most people are very civilized. I mean, we had to, heck, they got brand new basement carpet out of it. They thought it was a great deal, you know, off our insurance. They weren't upset a minute. There was a little bit of inconvenience, but they got a brand new floor. And we ended up paying for it. You know, and insurance isn't, they just don't pay the whole thing. We have a deductible, so we had to pay the first $500 or $1,000 or whatever it was, and then the insurance picked up the rest. But it ended up, those kind of things end up being pretty expensive. And that's part of business, you know, that's going to happen. Stuff happens, and you just can't avoid it all, no matter how hard you try. And you know, if that happened 6 months later, might have been our fault. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. What ends up happening is the insurance companies will go in and they'll do battle. So my insurance company would go to against the homeowner's insurance company, and oftentimes what they do is they'll fix percentage of blame. They'll say, well, the operator or the installer was 80% negligent and the homeowner was 20% negligent. Meaning that maybe the homeowner ran into the part with their lawnmower and it cracked it, and then that night it finally blew. Well, the part should have never been in a place where it ever got hit by the lawnmower, so therefore the contractor is responsible for most of the blame, but the homeowner still had some negligence in the fact that they did some of the damage, and so they'll end up sharing the blame. And that's pretty common on insurance claims, that they'll get together and negotiate who's responsible for which part. So there's a lot of different insurance that you have to deal with. You know, you got property insurance, and you got liability insurance, and you got the workman's comp that comes in as a separate issue as well, which are the forms that you're going to have to provide or will be provided to you if you're working for the company.